Hello and welcome back to another episode here on the channel. Thanks very much for joining me. Please don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. The subscribe button is down below. And also if you want any links to the articles I look at, you'll find those in the description. And also just don't forget to share the video with those you think might be interested in some of these topics. So here we're going to look at environmental comparisons of the Awash Valley, Turkana Basin and Lower Omo Valley from Upper Miocene to Holocene as assessed from stable carbon and oxygen isotopes of mammalian enamel. And this is by Paquette and Drapeau. So let's have a look at the highlights. So here we've got the highlights are as follows. Diets of bovids, suids and hippos, but not elephants, track the C4 plant expansion. At about 4 million years ago, C3 plants increase in the diet of all taxa in the Awash and Turkana basins. Only bovids' diet suggests more C3 plants in the Omo Valley throughout the Pliocene. Landscape structure was similar in the Omo and Turkana, in the Omo and Turkana, but the Omo was more mesic. And aridity increases in the Awash, suggesting it contributed to C4 plant expansion. So this is going to be an interesting paper. Let's have a look and see what the abstract says. The Awash Valley, Turkana Basin and the Lower Omo Valley of East Africa are three regions that have been particularly important for documenting the environment from the late Miocene to the Holocene, but these basins have never been compared throughout the large temporal sequence. In this context, we compare changes in the diet of herbivores with mixed diets such as the hippopotamids, the elephantids, the suids and the bovids. The total large vertebrate diet in the ecosystem, as well as water deficient from these three basins between 7.4 million and 10 million years, 10,000 years ago, to determine how they were different. Our sample consists of a compilation of more than 3,000 published mammalian stable isotopic values. Our results show that the Awash Valley becomes more arid through time, corresponding broadly with an increase in C4 plants, but that relationship is not clear in the other two basins. The Awash and Turkana are broadly similar in overall aridity, while the Lower Omo Valley is clearly more mesic between 4 and 2.5 million years ago. However, the Turkana and Omo are similar in ecosystem values, while it is the Awash that presents a landscape with more C4 plants. When comparing the diets, the three basins are similar, with an increase in C4 plants after 4 million years ago, after 3 to 3.4 million years ago in the Lower Omo Valley, with all taxa converging by 1.9 to 2.4 million years ago on a similar diet with mostly C4 plants. Elephants vary little throughout the sequence when compared to other taxa. Our data suggests that, except for elephantids, all taxa studied tracked the expansion of C4 plants in East Africa, and that this expansion may be in part related to a general increase in aridity. Okay, so let's have a look at the introduction, and then I'll move on to the conclusion. The lower Omo Valley, the Turkana Basin and the Awash Valley are three regions that have been particularly important for understanding past habitats and environments in Eastern Africa. Part of the effort has been to estimate climate conditions and available habitat types at different periods and in different regions, as well as to better understand how these environmental aspects vary temporally or geographically. Proxies to estimate climate conditions and habitats have included faunal uniformitarianism, faunal proportions, and ecomorphology, pollen and phytolith proportions, and sedimentology. More recently, methods using stable carbon isotopes have been developed. Carbon-stable isotopes from paleosol carbonates have been used to infer the proportion of woody cover, while stable isotopes from enamel carbonate has been used to determine the diet of fossil mammals and infer the proportions of trees and bushes versus grasses to tropical settings or habitat structure. Finally, oxygen-stable isotopes have been used to estimate aridity. However, few studies have investigated temporal trends that extend throughout the whole sequence from late Miocene to the early Holocene in all these regions. This study proposes to analyse stable oxygen and carbon isotopes of herbivores enamel from 7.4 million years ago to 10,000 years ago, with the goals of determining whether taxa that have a mixed C3-C4 diet follow similar trends within each basin, whether all three basins follow similar dietary trends for each mixed feeders, whether the ecosystem values and the aridity provide synchronous signals within basins, and whether the ecosystem values and aridity indices follow the same trends among basins. The broad aim of the study is to document how each basin varies through time and relative to each other, and whether the various signals provide a coherent picture of past environmental conditions. Although numerous studies have compared localities, basins at specific time periods, and the types of signals, none has compared all these signals in all three basins through the end of the Miocene to the Holocene for a more global perspective on these different signals on how these different signals vary within and among basins and possibly differ through time. Now, it's a rather chunky, detailed academic paper, so let's just skip down to the conclusion. So the goal of this research was to compare dietary signals of mixed feeder herbivore water deficits and stable carbon-13 ecosystem values in the Awash Valley, Turkana Basin and Lower Omo Valley between 7.4 and 7.4 million years ago and 10,000 years ago. Our data shows a similar pattern in dietary trends among taxa in the Awash Valley and the Turkana Basin, where there is a modest increase in C3 diets at around 4 million years ago, followed by a general increase for all taxa except elephants in the consumption of C4 plants afterwards. Water deficient and carbon-13 ecosystem values are broadly similar in the Turkana Basin and the Awash Valley. In contrast, the lower Omo Valley is clearly more mesic, and the herbivores have a more C3 diet than those in the Awash Valley and the Turkana Basin before 2.5 million years ago, while it is much less different after that period when comparisons are possible. Our results suggest that the carbon-13 values do not strictly follow aridity signals, with peaks of aridity not closely coinciding with an increased intake in C4 plants and vice versa. In the Awash Valley, the carbon-13 values and the diet of herbivores show to various degrees an increased presence of C4 vegetation starting at around 4 million years ago, and aridity gradually increases during that period. The lower Omo Valley has dramatically more mesic conditions when compared to the Awash and Turkana basins, but shows no clear significance in carbon-13 values when compared to the Turkana Basin. Thus, our results suggest a complex relationship between aridity and vegetation that is not uniform among basins. However, our observation of a long-term trend of increasing aridity in the Awash suggests that aridity is in part responsible to the expansion of C4 plants in that region. This study shows that the hippopotamus, suids and bovids all track the expansion of C4 plants in eastern Africa, but that the elephantids do not. There appears to be an increase in C3 plant consumption at around 4 million years ago, but better documentation of that period will be needed to confirm this trend, which is based on a limited number of localities. When comparable, the lower Omo Valley is more mesic than the other two basins in the Miocene, and there is some evidence that the herbivore diets were more C3, but the overall landscape appears to have been relatively similar to that of the Turkana Basin. This underscores that profiles provided by various proxies are not equivalent, and considered together they yield a more complete picture of the past. So that's a very interesting paper. Basically what we see, for those who didn't catch all of that, what we're looking at here is a continent that's going from rather wet to rather dry, from 7.4 million years ago to 10,000 years ago. But among these three basins, the Omo Valley, the Turkana Basin and the Awash Valley, we're finding a different response to the increasing general aridity of the landscape. And what's very interesting is that by looking at the stable isotopes in the teeth, looking at the stable oxygen and the stable carbon isotopes in the teeth of these herbivores, we're beginning to see a trend of an expansion of C4 plants throughout eastern Africa. And that's really fascinating. So let me know what you thought about this paper. It's fairly self-explanatory stuff, really. We've got a general trend of aridity across the continent, and then there's three regions across eastern Africa that show different, I suppose, responses to this general trend of aridity. And what's also interesting as well is the fact that by looking at the teeth of these herbivores, we can actually see indirectly the expansion of the C4 photosynthetic pathway, which is very, very fascinating. And on that, thank you very much for watching.